listener production.
Hey, it's Sacha Barbour Gatt. Welcome to the Weekend Briefing, where we chat with the people behind the headlines. This week's guest has been a pioneer in the domestic violence space in Australia, driven by a deep personal connection to the horror herself. At 19 years old, she learned that her stepfather had murdered a child in the home he shared with her, her siblings, and their mother. Battling deep pain and guilt, Sherele Moody went on to devote her life to advocating passionately for victims and survivors of violence, creating Australian Femicide Watch, along with a living memorial and map tracking every woman and child lost. The page has become a vital resource for both the public and the media, with Sherele's 3 decades in journalism helping to create what has become one of the most accurate and up-to-date public databases of domestic violence victims in Australia. It is by no means a light chat, but Sherele is a fascinating person and I personally very much enjoyed getting to know her, as I'm sure you will too. A little later on in the show is the Weekend List with Helen Smith, where we recommend what to watch, see, do, eat and listen to. But first, here is my chat with Sherele Moody, and a warning before we start, we do discuss some pretty heavy topics straight off the bat, including domestic and sexual violence. Here's Sherele now. Sherele Moody, thank you so much for joining us on the Weekend Briefing. Could you take us back to the day that you learned your stepfather had carried out 2 of the most horrific and disturbing murders on young girls in Australian history?
Yeah, I'm fine to do that. So I was about 19 years old and I was living in a town called Toowoomba in Queensland, and my one of my kid sisters said to me, "Can you come home? We'd love to see you in Roma." So the next day I got on the bus and went from Toowoomba to Roma, and my stepfather picked me up at the bus stop, and I was 19 and very much in my own head. And he was sitting there chatting about this little girl that had gone missing as he's driving me back to the family home, and sort of saying how he's going to join the search and all that sort of stuff. And I kind of just thought, oh, this guy's a bit of a weirdo, you know. About 4 days later, he did in fact join the search for the little girl. And about 4 days later, there was a knock on my mother's front door. I answered the door and there were 2 detectives on the doorstep with a warrant to search the house, and a bunch of detectives and police milling around in the background. And they came in, and one of the detectives, her name is Gail, she sat myself, my little sisters and my mother at the table while they took Barry into another room, and told us that they were looking for evidence in the case of a girl who'd gone missing who they thought had been murdered. And so that was a bit of a shock to all of us, for sure. We had no expectation that this was going to happen. A few hours later, they walked out with some evidence bags and him in handcuffs, and they took the family station wagon as well. They towed that away. The following day, I went down to the police station and spoke to the detectives, and Gail took me into an evidence room. And on the floor, there was a whole heap of material, and I was able to recognise a lot of that from my mother's house. Turns out that material that they'd found had been dumped near Stacey Ann's body. The story is, as I found out that day, Stacey Ann dropped her little sister Libby to school at a little school in Roma, and was walking the 100 or so metres to her own school gate when my stepfather pulled up, coerced her into the car, drove her to the family home. She escaped. She managed to escape, and a neighbour saw her running away and this big man chasing after her. They didn't intervene. That neighbour later told police that he thought that man was her father and that she was just being a naughty child. He saw her grab the little girl and take her back to the house. Stacey Ann never left that house alive. After he had sexually assaulted her and murdered her, he wrapped her in a garbage bag and dumped her along with some other items that he used in her murder at the local rubbish tip, just outside of the local rubbish tip, and she was found there 4 days later. And so she was found there the morning that they came with that search warrant at my mother's house. Anyway, I became a witness for the prosecution, and Gail and I were sitting on the back steps of the Roma police station, and the Roma Watch House is at the back of that police station. So you can sit on those back steps and look into the cells and see the prisoners there. And we were sitting there, and I was looking at him and he was looking at me, and I said to Gail, why did he do this? And she said, even the best psychiatrist in the world couldn't tell you that, Sherele. Only he can tell you that. And then I said to her, I understand that he killed a man and he went to prison for that. And she told me the story of Sandra Bacon. So he had never gone to prison for killing a man, which was what he told us. He had, when he was 19, a little girl called Sandra Bacon lived next door to him in Townsville. Sandra came out the front of the house one day and he said to her, I've got some library or some books for your big sister. Sandra went into the house to get the books, and she never came out of that house. He raped and murdered her like he did with Stacey Ann. He wrapped her in a corn sack, so an old Hessian bag, put her in the boot of the car, and then that afternoon he joined the search, just like he did with Stacey Ann. He joined the search for Sandra. He spoke to Sandra's parents and he said to them, I know what you're going through. My brother went missing and, we were worried for a long time. Anyway, within 24 hours, police found Sandra's body in his car in the back of his property, and he was charged with her murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While he was in prison, he became a Baptist minister. So he joined the Baptist church, became a minister, and the Baptist church was integral in getting him parole. So he was paroled after 22 years. Within weeks of being paroled, he met my mother, and they started seeing each other. And that was the story that he told all of us. I have 7 siblings, so that was the story he told us. That's the story he told everyone about King hitting a man in a bar. My mother knew that he had killed Sandra, so she met him, and the people who introduced him to her told her why he was in prison, but that didn't matter to her, and so she brought this man into our lives. For context, my littlest sisters, I have 4 little sisters, the youngest were around the age of Sandra when he came into our lives, so around 5 years old.
Wow. So after this came out about your stepfather, did you continue having a relationship with your mother?
So he was charged with Stacey Ann's murder. I became a witness for the prosecution. My relationship with my mother was already quite tenuous. I maintained that relationship the best I could. It was very hard because she vehemently believed that he had been stitched up. She gave evidence for the defence at trial. I gave evidence for the prosecution. And she remained married to him until he died in prison 7 years later. I ended my relationship with my mother within a couple of years of him being sentenced for Stacey Ann's murder.
Mm. How did this news and this revelation about your stepfather shape the rest of your years as you were your formative years as a teenager and entering adulthood?
Yeah, look, it was really hard. For me, I carried a lot of things. I carried a lot of guilt. I know intellectually, and everyone knows intellectually, that it's not your fault that someone does this. We all know that intellectually, but emotionally and psychologically, it's very different, so you carry this very heavy load of guilt, that those questions, is there anything I could have done to prevent this? Or, should I have known? If I had have known about what he did in the first place, would that have made a difference? I was very humbled to meet Stacey Ann's family on the day of her funeral. So I attended the church service. I met her mum, her little sister, her grandmother and her granddad. And at trial, I sat with Stacey Ann's family, not my own family, while we waited outside to give evidence. And after I gave evidence, Stacey's mum and family were up next to give evidence, and I actually took little Libby out for that day. I took her down to the Brisbane Mall and we spent the day together. So was really humbled to be able to meet them, and meeting them also had a big impact on my life, because I feel like if I hadn't have met them, I wouldn't have understood the trauma they were going through. So I think that and the guilt and the anger, it kind of accumulated and it sits with you. It was like a really big knot in the chest for a very long time. And I remember making decisions in my life that were influenced by the anger, the sadness, the shame, the embarrassment. It cost me relationships. It cost me friendships. I was very itinerant. So in those first couple of years after the murder, I practically lived everywhere. So I lived in Tasmania. I lived in Melbourne for a short time. I lived in Northern Territory, Queensland, and Western Australia. Like I was very itinerant. I couldn't find anywhere. It was like I was running away from this, and I could never run away from it. I think I was about 22 or 23. I decided that I had to make a change in my life, and I wanted to do something that kind of, would help me, make a difference for Stacey Ann. And so I went back to school. I was a high school dropout. So I went back to school and got my higher school certificate, and I applied for law and I applied for journalism, and I got offers for both, but I took the journalism degree. And I kind of, at the time, I thought, I'm doing this because the reporting around Stacey Ann was terrible. She was always reduced to a sex murder. That was the headline. She was never spoken about as a human being, as an individual. And so I became a journalist with these really great ideals, and over, 20 years of that career, I didn't really do anything with it. I never really went where I needed to go. And that changed in 2015. I think I just got to a point where I couldn't handle the guilt and the anger and the shame and all that sort of stuff. I needed to channel it into something, not erase it, but channel it. Otherwise, it was definitely going to destroy me. And so I started the Red Heart campaign, and I started focusing on sharing stories of domestic and family violence survival, because that's what I thought the need was at the time. And then within a few months of starting that campaign and starting to share stories and really zoning in on women's experience of violence, it still wasn't enough. And I decided that I needed to make an archive or a database of women and children lost to violence. Like, it felt like that was where I needed to be. And so I started documenting the killing of women and children. Obviously, Stacey Ann and Sandra were the first people I put on that database. And now in that 10 years, it's got more than 3,000 names and 3,000 stories of Australian women and children killed.
So it shaped, up until now, really, and it continues to shape who you have become and what you continue to do. I read that part of the reason that you decided as well to leave journalism was that you couldn't marry up how in instances of domestic violence or violence against women and children that it became centred on the perpetrator as opposed to the victim. We see the language in the media and in police reporting as well. It's very lacking empathy, lacking details, very muted language. Do you think that plays a role in desensitising the public to the horror of what goes on, and also perhaps spurring more of us into action?
The media plays a huge part in how we perceive the world. The media is integral to our daily thoughts and expressions. If you see media consistently blaming victims for their own murder, or, victim blaming, slut shaming, demeaning them, objectifying them, othering them, that's going to influence how you see the victims of violence. For me, I have sat in news meetings where I've seen women demeaned after they've been murdered, called names, so, offensive terms, the S word and the C word. I've seen editors direct journalists to dig dirt on victims of violence, go through their police records, go through their court records, work your police contacts, find out what you can. We need a headline. We need something to sell this story. That is the bread and butter for the media. And what they end up doing is they put out stories that really diminish the importance of the victims in other people's lives. You can look at almost every femicide in Australia and you can see this at play. So, for instance, if we can look at the alleged killing of Sophie Quinn and Nerida Quinn and John Harris in Lake Cargelligo this past few weeks. Now, the most recent reporting around their deaths centres on the paternity of Sophie's baby. That is not in the interest of the public. It's gossip and it's innuendo, and it plays no part in ethical reporting of their deaths. It absolutely does not. Sophie had a right to have a child with the person she chose to have a child with. It is neither here nor there whether or not the father of that baby is the killer or not the killer. It should not even be an issue of discussion. Journalists have gone into that town and they've found a guy with so-called close connection to the family who's spun them a story, and they've repeated that. They don't know the truth of what he's told them. And even if it was the truth, it's still not relevant. A man chose to end 3 people's lives because he chose violence, and he most likely did that because he was losing control of one of the victims. They shouldn't be going down and getting gossip from a local bloke in the street. They should go to experts, and they should be asking the experts about what are the influences, what are the factors, what are the drivers, why do people do this to other people. There is a lot of ways that they could ethically have reported this, and centering on her pregnancy or the fatherhood of her pregnancy was not one of them. This is victim blaming and it's slut shaming. There's no doubt about it. And this is what we see all the time. If a woman is killed and she's dumped in a wheelie bin, she becomes the wheelie bin murder. Her identity is entirely erased. If a woman is killed, for example, at a shopping centre, she becomes the shopping centre murder. She isn't, Joanne Smith. She's the shopping centre murder. That is erasure. Most often when a woman is killed, she's someone's wife or mother or daughter. She's never Joanne Smith or, Samantha Kelly. She's never those. It's always her relationship to the men in her life. This is what influences how readers see the world. And if that's what they're seeing and if that's what they're consuming, then of course they're going to start blaming women for their own deaths.
I want to talk about the Red Heart movement, which is a living memorial to the women and children who have been lost to violence in this country. And I suppose you've sort of touched on it there in that we don't centre on the victim enough. Playing devil's advocate, there are a lot of rules and laws specifically around how the media can report on who is a victim, their names, their identities. Where do we draw that line then when we're trying to give an identity to the victim without being able to name them or specify things like that?
So here's the deal. They can actually name the victim in most cases unless there's a suppression order. I know there are cultural limitations around Aboriginal women killed. For instance, let's take the death of Ms. Malta, who was killed. She was the first woman killed last year in Australia. Ms. Malta was a world-renowned artist. She was a mum. She was a community elder. She was a spiritual leader, an incredible woman. She was an integral part of her community up in the Northern Territory. The media reduced her to the hand sanitizer murder. That was their reporting. Now, they did that because a police source told a journalist that Ms. Malta was down at the riverbank drinking hand sanitizer with her partner. It's come from a police source. We don't know if that's true. We don't know what sort of leak that is, but regardless, it should never have been reported that way. The media could have actually spoken to her family and would have been told, yes, you can call her Ms. Malta, just like I did. And they would have got a really incredible story about this woman. They could have concentrated on her artistic career. They could have concentrated on the fact that, she was this incredible elder, community leader. There were so many ways that they could have reported that. There were no legal restrictions there, but they went down that line. It is a choice. So journalists are making a choice, and often those choices are not framed around the legal restrictions. Now, my work complies with sub judice or contempt, and it complies with defamation laws. It is based around my experience as a professional journalist, having worked in courts and covered police for a significant amount of my career. It very much informs what I do. And yet I'm still able to tell the stories of women and girls killed without demeaning them. It's a choice we make. You don't have to go and dig that dirt. You absolutely do not have to go do that. You can actually approach families in an ethical and responsible way, or communities, you can always find someone who's going to tell you something good about this person. There's no legal restrictions on that. I mean, obviously you're going to follow your cultural obligations, obviously going to follow the law. The reality is that most journalists, they might be following the law, but they're also demeaning victims while they're at it, and they're doing it for headlines, time on page, clicks, for social media algorithms, because they know that that's what, or they believe that that's what will bring the people in. But I would argue that if you report ethically and responsibility, people are going to still read that story. You don't need that kind of demeaning reporting at all.
Femicide Watch is the other page, I suppose it diminishes it, but page that you work on, that you publish each death as it occurs. And I know, working in news, that we actually use that source. But I'm curious to know, you say, you always adhere to defamation and legal requirements, but you do report on high-profile cases. Have you ever found yourself in hot water for contempt or anything like that?
No, I haven't been found in contempt because I do know where to draw the line. I mean, I will push the envelope as far as possible, absolutely, but I do know where to draw the line to protect myself and protect everything that I've built up. But yes, I've actually, this past year, I had 4 threats to sue. So one came through as a solid concerns notice. I reported on a man who is charged with a raft of offences against his former partner, including rape and assault. I reported on the charges, and it was well within contempt laws. It was well covered. I was reporting on what was before the court, and he actually threatened to, he tried to make me sign a document that would have silenced me from ever talking about him, the case, or his victim from that point on. And I stood my ground, and it didn't go to court, thankfully. But there was a real chance that I was going to be dragged into court to defend what he said was a defamation. And I would have defended it. It would have been worth the cost to defend it, because it wasn't a defendable defamation at all. But usually I get the defamation threats to silence me. So I got a text message from a very high-ranking union official a few weeks ago, and he threatened to shut me down because I reported legally on his acts of violence against a former partner. This is really common. But in terms of contempt, I'm fine.
Well, it's that journalistic background,
Yeah.
right? You like you said, you know where the line is. Your podcast, She Matters, is specifically branded as not a true crime podcast.
That's true.
Do you take issue with the popularity of the genre in Australia? And I think immediately to Erin Patterson, who has been found guilty of a domestic violence murders,
100%.
multiple.
Yeah.
And I mean, how salacious it became. It became a joke. I've seen people comment on any sort of recipe about a beef Wellington, and it's Erin Patterson, and they laugh and they joke about it. And it's all been driven by that obsession with true crime. Do you take problem with that?
I think that the way that the media covered Erin Patterson, and they basically made her into a true crime pop star, like a star of true crime, basically. I think it is really incredibly unethical and was unnecessary, and she should have been treated, her victims should have been treated much better. In not only turning this person into a true crime icon, what they did was they diminished the victims. The victims became very much like 10th place in that story. There was some reporting where their names weren't even mentioned. Like, they literally weren't mentioned. It was outrageous and disgusting and really disturbing to see this woman who chose an act of violence, who chose to control, chose to kill, turned into, I don't even know how you can explain that. It's like she became the Hannibal Lecter of Australian media, I guess. It's appalling. It really isn't necessary. But I also understand what drove it, and I understand that there was a lot of money in that for media outlets, and there's still a lot of money in it. A lot of people are making a lot of money off her victims, off her and her actions. They're profiting from it, and her victims are very much not even on the Richter scale here.
People want to consume true crime content, right?
Yeah.
So the argument there is that, well, people are interested.
Yeah.
We're going to produce that content for them. So is there a line?
Look, I think that there is a line, and I think that we do need to find it. We need to find out. We need to find the ability to ethically report and to ethically cover these cases. Violence absolutely must be covered. Every aspect of violence, whether it's perpetrated by men or women, needs to be covered, but it needs to be covered in a way where victims are centred and where families are centred. So it's trauma-informed, victim-centred reporting. I don't kid myself. I don't think that we will ever see the way that I think that we should approach it. That's never going to happen. I get that. Which is why with She Matters, it was really important for me when I put out that podcast, when I started formulating the idea, that I made it very clear to people, you are not coming here to listen to a grisly tale of murder. You're not coming to find ha-ha moments. You're not coming here to find, the deep, dark degradation. This is not what it is. This is not a bloodlust podcast. It is a lives lived and lives lost podcast. It is very much centred around women and girls killed. Yes, the crime has to be discussed because that is the context of their death. And we cannot discuss their lives and their deaths without touching on the crime, because there are failures before she dies, the points where we could have saved her, and there are failures during the legal process, and there are failures after. So it's really important that we be able to examine them. What I did with She Matters is basically it is trauma-informed, it's victim-centred. So I speak to the families. We agree, when they agree that they want to come in and have a conversation with me, they get a list of questions that is centred around their person, that is written specifically around their person and their case. But I always say to them, think of this list of questions as a guide. Sometimes when we're in an interview, you forget something. And so these are the questions I'm going to ask in case you forget. But basically it's a conversation around your person. So we come in and we start that conversation, and it always starts with, tell me the first memory of her. And that gets the ball rolling. And often the questions don't get asked because it comes out naturally in that conversation. And then if I need to explore a tangent, obviously I'm going to ask them the relevant questions. But it's not just, telling them how the interview is going to work and having them in a studio that's really inviting and calm, having a producer who is feminist aligned and quite ethical, but a lot of experience in the space. There's also, they can withdraw from the conversation at any point. If they want to stop, that's fine. No shade at all. They get the drafts of the episode and they sign off on the final version. If they sit on that episode for 6 months, that's fine. If I don't hear from them, or if they come back to me and say, hey, I'm sorry, but I've decided I don't want it to go to air, not a problem. They make a decision about whether or not that goes to air. So they are very much in control of it from woe to go. That is ethically and family-centred journalism. At the end of that process, I don't just go away. So, for instance, a couple of hours after the interview, I check in with them. Even before they leave the studio, I make sure they've got someone with them. I make sure they're going to be okay that afternoon. I check in with them that afternoon. I check in with them in 24 hours and I stay in touch with them because I don't want them to think that I've just come in and taken their person's story and that's it. And then I just leave you sitting like a frog on a rock and you don't have any more contact with me. This is what trauma-informed reporting is about. It's taking care of them through every step. I make sure when we have those conversations that there is no victim blaming. There's no essence of that from me. So, for instance, if a woman has remained in the home because she's concerned about his welfare, I'm not going to say that because it kind of has a tinge of victim blaming. So I'll phrase the question in a way that is much more ethical and doesn't come across so when the listener hears it goes, this is the reason why she got killed. She should have made a better choice. So it's just all about that. And I think that, if you have the right training, it's actually an easy thing to do.
The work you do is heavy, to put it very, very lightly. What is the motivation for you to keep going when, I mean, it's a choice, right? You could walk away from this and not have to carry these stories with you. What is it that motivates you?
Oh, absolutely. Stacey Ann Tracy and Sandra Dorothy Bacon are always the centre of what I do. So those two little girls, they should still be here. Stacey Ann is 9 years younger than me, so she would be around 44 this year. And Sandra would be in her 60s. And I have no doubt that Sandra would have great grandkids, and I have no doubt that Stacey Ann would have achieved her dream of being a performer. They are very much at the centre of what I do, and everything I do is a legacy for them. Also their families, especially Stacey Ann's family. I know the impact of my stepfather's actions on her family is profound. It continues to be profound. I know that her granddad, who absolutely adored her, died of a broken heart. Her relatives have suffered extreme health conditions because of the stress and the trauma. It changed the trajectory of their lives. Her little sister, her life would have been very different if Stacey Ann was still alive. Her little sister would have made very different choices. There's no doubt. And they are at the centre of what I do too. So it's not just Stacey Ann, it's not just Sandra's family, them individually, but it's their families as well. And then there's the families that I work with outside of Stacey Ann and Sandra. So almost every death I document, I have contact with their families. It's rare that I don't. And, these are incredibly brave and courageous people. Often they will front media in the worst possible time of their lives. They will stand there and they're articulate and strong, and they want their person's story to be told in the way that means they're valued. When you work with people like that, it is really hard to just kind of feel sorry for yourself. It is really fucking hard. You don't. You just, if I feel sorry for myself, or if it is too much, it's not very hard for me to go to find inspiration. Yeah.
Sherele, before we let you go, how do we as a community, as a society here in Australia, keep having this conversation when so many people, I hate to say it, they're turned off by it. It's too depressing. It's too hard to fix. How do we keep pushing forward to try and find some sort of solution?
Look, I think there's a few things, and it's a really long answer to that. But I think the first key thing is it's okay to dip out. So, yeah, of course, it is a heavy load. And if you're trying to make change in this space and it becomes too heavy, please take some time out and look after yourself, because we need your voice. We need you to come back. We need you to look after yourself and get strong and have the resilience to come back. As a media industry as a whole, we need to work out a better way of reporting on violence against women and children. We absolutely do need to do that. If you're a journalist and you're listening to this, if you're an editor, if you're doing anything that sees the production of stories around this topic, please reach out to Our Watch. They have an amazing fellowship. They teach you how to ethically report on violence against women and girls. I did that program quite a few years ago, and it changed the way that I approach what I do. I learnt so much, and it was really intense and worthwhile. Doesn't cost a thing. So apply for that fellowship every year until you get it. As a community, we need to understand, we need to educate ourselves, we need to have critical thinking, we need to understand the drivers and factors of violence against women, what drives people to do it, how do we fix it, and how do we as individuals make a difference. The other thing is we need our policymakers and our politicians to step up. There are an incredibly large number of holes in our safety nets, and those holes are in every aspect. So from policing to courts to housing to financial, the family law system, there's a lot of holes there. Every death I document, I can find a failure where she could have been saved. And it's so blatantly obvious that the fixes are not, that these holes are not being fixed, they're not being funded properly, and there's really not much will. So we really need to work out a way to change that. And I do implore policyholders and politicians to step up. At the end of the day, most women are killed by men. Not to say that women aren't killed by women, but around 95% of the deaths I document are women killed by men known to them. So those men may be a partner, a former partner, a family member, or an associate. So someone she knows outside of the family circle, a neighbour, a friend, a fellow student. It could be anyone. Male violence is not a thing that women can solve. We as women don't have the tools to do that or the capacity. The only people who can do it are men. It's not saying that every man is violent. What I'm saying is every man has a role to play in helping reduce this problem. And, women are very happy to stand there and give a hand, but we can't fix it. We can only try to save our sisters.
Sherele Moody, thanks for sharing your story with us on the Weekend Briefing.
Thank you.
That was Sherele Moody speaking with me there. And if our chat brought up any issues for you, remember you can contact 1-800-RESPECT either by calling that number or by accessing the resources on their website. And you can keep up with Sherele's valuable work via the Red Hearts campaign website, on Instagram at Sherele Moody Femicide Watch, and on her podcast She Matters. All right, now a change of pace for the weekend list. All right, getting into the weekend list where we recommend what to watch, see, do, eat and listen to. And this year we want to hear from you. What would you recommend to us if we were catching up for coffee this weekend? Listener Issy has sent this in.
Hey, I'm Izzy and I live in Sydney. I'm definitely late to the party on this one, but season 3 of Tell Me Lies dropped on Disney Plus a few weeks ago, and I'll be watching that from this weekend. It is honestly one of the best shows I've seen in the last few years. It's so gripping. The characters are all so intense and such dramatic storylines. The fashion is great. But yeah, I completely recommend this show, and I think everyone should be watching it because it's like something for everyone in there.
Oh, that sounds like a good one. Thank you, listener Izzy. What do you reckon, Helen? Will you give it a go?
Look, I'm going to give it a go, but I don't have a Disney Plus account, so might have to do the free trial for that one.
All right, Helen, what's your first recommendation?
My first recommendation is also a watch. It is the new season of Bridgerton on Netflix.
Yes.
Now, I've watched the whole thing. It is very Bridgerton vibes, but it has had a lot of commentary that it's a rip-off of Cinderella.
Oh, okay. All right, because I've watched, I'm a Bridgerton gal. I'm not a hardcore fan, but I've watched all the seasons. I found that the format got tired from 2 onwards because it was the exact same one as the first one. Will they, won't they? Are they going to make out? Are they not? Are they going to have sex? Are they not? It was exhausting for me. So I'm kind of want 4 to be different.
It definitely is a bit different. There is a little bit more raunchy and romance from the other couples, but the storyline for me was this is Cinderella.
Okay.
But it's still so well, it's still shot beautifully. The costumes are divine. The actors are lovely. And it's starring an Australian actress, which is pretty exciting. Erin Patterson. She does a great job. She's so freaking gorgeous as well. And I think she really suits the period timepiece. But yeah, a lot of fun. It really makes you love. I think it's quite a refreshing escape from the news cycle at the moment.
That's really romantic for you, Helen. Not in your MO, I reckon, being so into love.
I love romance, but I don't love it in real life.
Yeah. Fair. My recommendation's a bit rogue, but guys, if you need something to do, let's use the news cycle as an example. You're feeling a bit down and depressed, plan a holiday. Now, I haven't booked a holiday. I got hit with a sponsored ad for I can't even remember what the website was, but it was My Vanuatu, and I just started planning a little holiday in my head, and it really took me out of my own life for a few minutes. Now, the reason I'm not actually booking is because I am going away at the end of the year. I'm going to Lord Howe Island, which I'm really excited about. But I just think sometimes role playing and just being I'm imagining myself on a deck chair next to a pool in Vanuatu is a really nice thing to do. And you never know, you might actually find a way to book said holiday, because I found a really good deal and I nearly did book it. But as a mother, I can't just go off on a whim on holidays, but maybe someone listening can. So
you're going to manifest it, Sash.
Book a holiday. What's your next recommendation?
Okay. All right. I'm imagining. I like that one.
Thanks.
And you might make it happen. I have hope.
Thanks.
My next recommendation is actually a film festival happening in Australia, and it's starting on the 19th of February. It's called EUROPA Film Festival, and it showcases European films, so from 22 different European countries, so, all the classics like France, Greece, Spain, Ukraine even, Italy, and some of them are actually featuring pretty well-known actors. We've got Amanda Seyfried and my favourite Willem Dafoe info. So this is also the first time that this film festival has expanded outside of Sydney and Melbourne. It's going to run simultaneously in Brisbane, Hobart, and even Auckland, just across the ditch. So if you really want to check out some amazing European films, that's my recommendation. Just search EUROPA Film Festival and you'll find all the details there.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you, listener Issy, for getting in touch with your recommendation this week. That is it for the Weekend Briefing. But if you're listening and you'd like to share your own contribution for the weekend list, slide into our DMs with a voice note on Instagram. That's the best place to do it, at The Briefing Podcast, and we will play it out on a future ep. Now, The Briefing returns tomorrow with our Sunday bonus, an extra deep dive into something topical. And then we are back into Everything News Monday with the headlines at 6 a.m. I am Sacha Barbour Gatt. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for listening.